Hello and welcome to another extraordinary Blake Society event. I'm Stephen Pritchard, Blake Society Secretary, and we've got a fantastic thing for you tonight. Just before we introduce our guest tonight, I'd just like to send best wishes to one of our patrons. Mike and Kate Westbrook have been fantastic patrons and usually attend the events. And I had a message from Kate saying that Mike's been in hospital. He's out now, convalescing, but still feeling a little groggy and so won't be joining us tonight. But Mike and Kate Westbrook, of course, created the Westbrook Blake, the amazing music for Adrian Mitchell's play, and have been working with Blake for 50 years. So I hope your convalescence goes really well, Mike, and love to you both. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my fellow trustee, Tamsin Rosewell, who is herself a bookseller and an illustrator, an artist, and she is going to be talking to three of the production team of the Folio Society. We would ask you to keep your cameras and mics off until invited to put them on for the Q&A and discussion, which will follow the panel discussion. Right now, I would like to just say, here we go, because they've created an extraordinary book, which Tamsin will tell you about. And this book is a facsimile of something created by William and Catherine Blake, without doubt. Tamsin, welcome. Hello.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen, and indeed best wishes to Mike Westbrook. I was really delighted to be able to have this event with the Blake Society, because as I've been in the book industry for 17 years, and the Folio Society and what they produce has always had the status for me of a kind of national treasure. It's sort of what all books should aspire to be. They've got collectors all over the world. They still ship all over the world. And for me, the Folio Society is the body that is still recognizing that paper and books remain among our greatest technologies, even in this great age of what we think of as technological advance. It was founded in 1947. And I looked at what else was going on in 1947, and it really does seem to be an age of huge cultural energy. So that's when the Ealing Studios first came about. So it's a great age of filmmaking as well. There's some of our country houses are open for the first time, so people were able to see the treasures that were in them, post-war, presumably that's what they had to do for the money when the money was gone. It's also, this is a huge thing in my mind, that it's the first time that soft toilet paper was available to the general public as well. But also the school leaving age was raised to 15 at then. The first Edinburgh Festival is going on. And women are allowed full membership at Cambridge for the first time. And Cambridge is actually very much part of this story. So before I introduce you to our panel, I'm going to actually introduce you to the book we're going to be talking about, which is in this beautiful clam box here. We've got a very short film made by the Folio Society about the book, which shows it to you close up rather than me waving it on the screen. So perhaps, Ian, could we run that short film just to introduce the book? Thank you very much. So I would really like to welcome, we have with us of the Folio Society Art Director Raquel Leis Allion. We've got Production Director Kate Grimwade, and also Senior Designer Charlotte Tate. So let's come on screen, Raquel, Kate and Charlotte. And I've got so many questions about how you went about producing this extraordinary book. Let's start. What I really want to know is, what was that first trip to Cambridge like to look at the original book? I mean, we're all used to those, perhaps those tiny little pocket-sized things that maybe we even had from school. But what was it like? Tell me about that very first visit to Cambridge, to King's and Cambridge to see.
Oh, well, luckily that was me. I was the same. I'd only ever seen this as a small book, that the Tate edition that we did as a co-edition years ago, and we wanted to go back to see how we might do a special edition of it. But it was the fact that we saw it in these beautiful jewels of illustrations set on this beautiful page, and that was very exciting. I mean, you don't ever know what you're going to see, and then when you have the privilege of going to the archive library at Cambridge and you're faced with this amazing thing at first hand, and the colors, the intensity, it was just magical, really magical.
And we've got a photo, actually, you were very kind enough to send that. Can we have a look there with the first and second images that you sent through? The first one is this beautiful, you can really see the gold and the intensity of color on that. And actually you can see the size of the paper, that it isn't that tiny.
Not
that
at
tiny
all.
little object at all.
No, and in fact, the book, I mean, you held it up. I mean, this is the size of we've done it almost, well, exactly to the size. So each page in our edition is the page of the manuscript itself, the same size.
So that second image that you've sent through, is that inside Cambridge? Talk me through, what am I looking at here?
You just happened to be looking at some Vanessa Bells that just happened to be on the wall, which was, we were sort of completely transfixed by the manuscript, and then sort of eyes drift around the building, and then and then those on the wall. So it was really quite lovely to be able to get so close to those two.
So I mean, this journey sort of started in Cambridge, but what I'm really curious to know is, did you look at other editions? Did you, this is copy W that we've got this facsimile of now. Did you look at other issues, and what was so special about copy W of all of the ones that you could have leapt in and looked at?
We did do some research, not me, James, who's the editor on this project, sought advice from Maurice Eves at the Blake Archive, who suggested several copies, and when this happens, we've got to look at trying to get the best copy, ones that are most accessible, that we'll be allowed to look at, and the condition of them. There was a copy at the Met, actually, which is also, I think, copy Y, which is very good, but obviously it's a bit more complicated working with a Met, and then we looked more into copy W and realized that it was unique because it was his own copy, it was Blake's own copy, and apparently Blake's wife Catherine claimed that this copy was especially precious from having been Blake's own. It's been described as being elaborately coloured with strong and precise colouring, and the borders are particularly special. The borders were supposedly done by Catherine after Blake's death, which makes it unique. And apparently it was also owned by E.M. Forster. So altogether, it seemed like, and it's at Cambridge, so it seemed like it had so many pluses for us.
Okay. Can I sort of, before we get into the detail and really talk about the colour and the gold and the paper and all of those aspects of it, can I ask you a more general question about what is a folio book? Because I think, years ago, the folio were the classics, they were what somebody else decided was a classic. But now what you're publishing is, there's all kinds of books that have got their own cult following. There's a lot of sort of Neil Gaiman's work, a lot of newer books, a lot of really more contemporary books as well. What is it that makes the folio book? What is the folio book?
Does somebody else want to answer? Do you reckon, Charlotte, you want to? What would you?
Right.
I
think,
go on.
I mean, we can all join in a little bit, because I guess we all have different opinions or thoughts on it. For me, it's what makes a folio book is the production, how we bind things. It's not glued, and it's all handmade, more or less. It's fully illustrated. We work closely with artists and illustrators. The attention to detail is next to nothing. We really look at all the nooks and crannies of every aspect of the book. And for example, this Blake one, Kate going to Cambridge and having to look at the real thing. It's a lot of I was going to say work, but it's not work. It's actually pleasure doing all this.
And I've noticed as well that, a lot of the ones that are being produced recently are the ones that have sort of caught the zeitgeist. They're, the works by Philip Pullman, by things that books, older books that have had a resurgence of interest are coming through. And I think, for me, almost, that is the definition of what Blake was doing as well. It's got this following that's grown and grown and grown, even if he didn't set out to write a classic. We're not in that territory at all.
I think with Blake, he matched poetry and illustration. I mean, that's what he was doing there, and it's what we do. I mean, we just make beautiful books with beautiful materials, beautifully designed internally, amazing illustrators, beautiful external designs. And I think that's why this project is particularly special, because really it's about that perfect match of those two things, and it's what we try to do day in, day out, to the highest standard possible. With no corners cut.
No,
Charlotte,
I think it's sorry. I was going to say, I think it's because we are a company full of book lovers. Our entire image that we want to do is that we are trying to make the best possible version of this book, and just striving to see how we can do that. We want a copy that we would want to buy ourselves.
We were chatting when we met about how in the 90s the rest of the book industry seemed to go through a phase when it was attempting to look as functional as possible and match the emergence of the ebook, this sort of new technology, because that was what they thought the interest lay in. But actually, consistently throughout that period, Folio was still on creating the beautiful book, which is what William Blake was doing, in the first place. And now the rest of the industry has kind of caught up with that, and then there are more and more beautiful books being produced. So can we just dive into the process, do a deep dive in? I actually want to start by talking about paper, because paper in William Blake's time was incredibly important and really differently produced to what we have now. But they would have had paper made from rags. It wasn't the pulp that we're talking about now. So how did you choose the paper for this project? Because I'm also aware that paper affects things like how color appears, surface texture, how even text appears. So can we just talk about the paper, the fundamentals?
Well, when we're going back to something like this, where we're actually going back to an original, whenever I visit something like that, I take a bundle of paper samples with me, because it's what you see there, that you sort of remember it in your head, and then you come back and there are of course so many different shades and textures. So that's what I tend to do, is just take paper along and try and match it to something similar. The paper was really beautiful. It had watermark in it, but it was really quite it wasn't really rough, but it was a watercolor paper. And it felt quite simple but very beautiful. So we wanted to match that as close as possible. That's what I sought to do, which we managed to do. But when you're doing reproduction, generally it's easier if you're working with color to go for coated paper. But Blake's paper, of course, was watercolor, so uncoated. So it was that sort of, it was much more important because I think when you see copies of Songs of Innocence, particularly the Tate copy, it's on a coated art paper, which sort of feels shiny and whatever, but it's not as the original was, which was on this very soft watercolor paper.
No, that's really interesting, because I think I'm aware that when you see color images in books, that sort of slight shininess on the paper often brings the pop of color up, and also enables things like gold, and we will come back to talk about gold. So what were the options in doing that? So if you've got this color to reproduce, did you ever look at using maybe a different type of paper where the color would have been as bold as it appears on Blake's on copy W?
Not having seen the original, no. It just had to be. It had to feel like the original. It had to be authentic. I mean, you can do different things if you use coated paper. With the gold particularly, you could have used some sort of foiling method. There are methods that you can do on press where you actually, it's called cold foiling, where you can create actual golds that pop, that you do. We use it quite a lot at Folio. It's a really interesting technique, but you have to use a coated paper. So we felt that just was the wrong thing to do. It just wouldn't have felt right, particularly doing it in these lovely big pages. It felt you had to be turning the pages and feeling like you were turning the original pages. So, but we had it rephotographed. So we asked King's if we could have permission to rephotograph the manuscript, which is what they did for us. They allowed this to happen, one of their in-house teams, which meant that we had new files, which were obviously, you know, top quality, and then we could use latest reprographics on those files to make sure that we matched that intensity of color just as closely as we can through the litho process.
Ian, could we have a look at what I think is image 9, because we can see on that image, do I mean image 9 with the color strip down the side, because we can see the size of the paper and the little strip of color downside with the color matching. So I sort of want to dive a bit more deeply into color. So that's the baby. Thank you very much. So we've got we could tell me what I'm seeing here. With this is the original. This is one of your photographs of the original pages, and then your own color chart down the side.
Yes, that's what it is. And then I think there was a file, wasn't there, Charlotte, where which when we tried to, what we wanted to do is capture the gold and somehow show the areas which particularly, you know, in the lettering, in the title lettering in songs, where on the original it was gold. So when they photographed the manuscript, we asked them to photograph it twice. Once it's just a straight photograph, and the second one they use a ring flash, and the ring flash makes the gold pop, and so you therefore have two images, and you can therefore separate out that area of gold and create a mask, and that's something Charlotte did, and that would I don't know if you've got.
I do. So if you can look at image 7, Ian, Charlotte, do you want to just talk us through that process? If you pull up image 7, Ian, then we can, you know, actually just understand that a little bit better, because that's not something that I've ever seen done in illustration. It'd be nice to have a look at that. So I really want to sort of dive into the gold issue, because when we look at those photographs, you can see the gold really shimmering on the surface.
Yeah, so it was as Kate was saying, we took a second photograph of each illustration purely with the gold in mind. So obviously all the colors of everything else shifted and shunted out and wouldn't be as you expected, but it captured all of the highlights and the lowlights of the gold, quite similar to how you'd potentially do some product photography of gold foiling. And from that, we could then extract the areas of the particular gold, and that could then be merged on top of the first original photograph. So you really get the gold popping when it's merged together.
So can we just have another, you've got another one of these, so can we have a look at image 8, which is also the same process but with a different image, and you can see the little highlights on the sheep, I think, on this one. It'd be nice to sort of have a look at that. So thank you. There we go. So what if we look at if you look at the original thing, then there's gold shimmering across the backs of all of the sheep. So the black is indicating where the gold is for you, is that right?
Exactly, and that's highlighting the areas that we needed to then pull out or highlight onto the other illustration or the other photograph.
Okay, so how did you highlight that then? Because actually gold is not, he was using gold leaf originally, and actually it's not hugely practical. It's an extremely slow, messy and very expensive process, isn't it? And I know that some of my colleagues have wondered, you know, how they could have afforded the gold to go onto it, and obviously you've got a price point issue as well. So what did you do with this just to bring out that highlight?
So this is the beauty of where Photoshop and using what tools are accessible to us, where we can actually mask out areas within that on that particular photograph, and then merge the two as different layers onto one another.
So did you so what sort of things did you use to boost? Did you use a brighter gold color to boost the what would have been the gold areas?
Yes, and where it had been shot with the ring flash, those areas are naturally brighter on that second photograph.
Right,
so
I see what you mean.
You can then merge the two together, layer them up, and you compose a comped up image with the two best quality. So you don't lose any of your quality on your color, but you gain all of the gold.
Right. Oh, I see what you mean.
It became a sort of brighter yellow in a way, because if you
Yes.
use gold ink, it's really flat. Excuse me. So gold foil wasn't an option for uncoated paper, and gold ink just sort of goes brown. It just doesn't work when you use a Pantone gold and print it full color. But the Repro house was able to make those areas the brightest yellow out of four colors that they could, which means that they really pop out of the printed page. So we got a really good result out of full color printing.
And we have, of course, got the thank you, Ian. Can we have, I'm going to hold up the book now, because we there has got the gilding on the edge, which you can see flashing in the light. But I want to talk about this green, and let's give a shout out to the little ribbon as well. So Raquel, this is your work here. What we've got, I'm going to hold this up and open, because inside that clamshell we've got a close-up image. Is this the blossom? A close-up of the blossom? If
I believe so.
Yeah.
It feels like we because we work so, we work very far ahead, and it feels like it's been a long time, but I believe it is, and it's just a zoomed in detail of one of the image, and I felt it had a lot of the colors that Blake used, and I know that you're really the expert on the exact names of the colors. He used a lot of Persian blues and ochres, and the pinks are they called madder? Is it madder?
There's a madder. There's a madder lake that we know he was using. So talk to me about the green as well, because that green fabric, we've got two different greens. I noticed we've got a different green on the clam box, and then why? You can see the difference.
I mean, really what I wanted to do with the binding and the box is keep it simple, because you want Blake's images to sing, and they are so full of detail and color that I didn't want the binding and the box to be these crazy colors. I also looked at his images, and I felt there was a lot of nature in there, and he did use greens. He did like greens, and I liked the tonality of both greens. And it's kind of separated. It's, sometimes they're really simplistic reasons. They separate the binding, they separate the box, but it also offsets the colors that Blake used. I think that those particular greens, like sagey greens, really offset the colors that he used. And again, I wanted to use his on the side. For that, I wanted to use his hand done type, because it's just beautiful, and I didn't feel
you chose this for the front. So actually I think it would be almost more typical of a folio book to have a contemporary design to bring it up to front, but you chose this one.
Well, we did visit that sort of route, really, and I love Blake, and I just didn't feel it was right, and I just thought he's done something so beautiful with type that why aren't we using it? So I made it really big, and I think it works really well. And actually the end papers, I wanted to talk about the end papers. I used orange.
Yes, I know. I was, because I know what an end paper is as an illustrator, but I didn't actually know the word for this bit here. These lining. So that's the lining, and these are the end papers, which
those are the end
tiger orange.
Exactly, yes. So he didn't really use that much orange, but tiger poem, it's just so well known that I think we had to give a nod to the tiger.
He was definitely using vermilion, which is this very bright orange red. So that's not.
It's more reddy. That I feel the orange is a bit more tiger,
tigerish, a bit more
tigerish. Yes,
that's very tigerish. Can we chat a little bit about finding the balance between creating something that is true to all of what we've been talking about, is kind of maintaining the truth of what Blake did, that essence of what it was he was doing, but it's also got to be viable in our market. I mean, you can't start using gold leaf in editions like this. No one would be able to afford it these days anyway. So what is the balance between creating something viable for the market but also staying true to the spirit of that work?
Well, that's quite, I mean, when we start a project, I mean, I'm fundamentally responsible for the margin in the end. I'm responsible for how much we spend per book based on, based on the selling price. So I guess we start a project off, and there'll be a book team, and there'll be a price point that we're aiming towards, and a print run as well. So that, of course, always balances. The more you do, the better your margin, etc., etc. But we just have certain standards that we just have to keep. Sometimes it's a bit of negotiation, I think, within the team. Those sort of, Charlotte, Raquel will have ideas on how to design something, whatever, and and the product development is a key part of. I really think of how Folio is different from any other publisher. I think we work as a team on every project. Editor, production, art director, designer. We're a team all the way through. So there's a lot of we're and it's very much everybody coming up with ideas and what can we do, but it just has to be the best it can be and the truest it can be, I think. And sometimes with something like this, it's led by the original text, but sometimes it comes from the illustrator, or it comes from an internal design and a vision on how we might lay the text out. So you're right all the time, it's commercial. I mean, we do it for fun, but we do have to make sure that.
And I'm just out of curiosity, in terms of an illustrator, but you're producing books like this, but you're also working with illustrators to newly illustrate books that were not originally illustrated. And I know from my own work that it being the first illustrator to do something is a really different experience than being the illustrator who's called on to reissue a book, a much older book. So for you, presumably you've all worked on books where you've got that new illustration as well as working with a book that was already illustrated in this case. So was it a really different experience doing one from the other?
Well, we have done a lot of work like this with original manuscripts. So Raquel is the person who's working with the illustrators. So
I mean, something say like Shakespeare, which you can see here in the background. That was really interesting because we commissioned an illustrator, and we specifically went to Neil Packer because he's kind of modern, but he nods back to the medieval period, and he kind of had this juxtaposition of doing both, and he based it on playbills and everything. And I think we carefully look for illustrators that match the text. I can't really explain how it's done. It's there's two art directors, and we read the books, and we just know the illustrators, and we go, oh, that matches this text, and we put them together, and usually most of the time they work.
I was made aware that they still study songs of innocence and of experience at A level in particular, but they're getting students to do it without the images, which seems to me completely mad, when actually the image in this case is at least half of everything that it is, and what it is you read the images as much as you read the poetry. Can we talk about the other aspects of the book, because we've got what is actually very familiar to all of us with Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, and it's really nice to see those close-up images of the gold and talk about how you've done it. But it has also got the transcripts at the back with the poems, which they're numbered and they're set out. I'm really curious, how did you choose everything from the font to the layout of that? I'm really interested in font and for typography aspects of it. Is that your role, Charlotte?
It is, yeah. So it was the idea with this book is that we wanted the illustrations to sing. That's how we wanted it. So that's why we made the decision to move all the transcripts to the back of the book. Because most often you will find this book where you'll have the text opposite the illustration on a page. So that's where we really wanted our edition to be a little bit different. And as I say, we really wanted those illustrations to sing and have their own space as well, without being crammed. Besides maybe text that doesn't always, if it's not set quite right, to not really complement it. So as I say, we moved them to the back. We did actually trial maybe having them on their own separate page, but the format of this book, and where you have such short lines in poetry, it didn't work. It felt quite awkward. So we made the decision that we actually really liked having a 2-column layout, and it just worked so beautifully, that short lines and the prose, and it also meant you didn't have them pages and pages of the transcripts at the back of the book. And again, we could really make the book itself to be about these illustrations, and it to complement having those transcripts at the back. And the typeface itself, it's in Caslon. So that was designed by William Caslon in the 1700s. Again, it felt of the period. It felt like it just goes very well with this style of book. And it's also the particular cut that I used of this, it's modern, so you won't ever find a true edition of Caslon, but it's quite delicate. And actually that goes in our favor for this book, because it's not too punchy against the illustrations, and it's not trying to shout and actually overcomplicate what we're trying to do. It just nicely sits next to them. But it's also got really beautiful things like the swashes and the ligatures. So if you look at the certain headings, you'll have CT ligatures, which you don't usually find, and also all the capital letters have got the swashes.
This is all terminology that I'm not very familiar with, so talk me through this. If I hold up a page there, I don't know if anyone can see more. And there's probably not a brilliant image closely.
Yeah,
so...
I mean, the introduction's got a CT ligature. If you go to the introduction,
okay,
they've just got really nice little hints towards. It just all works really well with the illustration and the borders that were then drawn. Yeah,
even if you can see that really close up. So can we talk about the illustration, the introduction? Because we got this introduction by Patti Smith to the book. Do all folio books have a forward that introduction? And you know, I suppose we asked, do we need it? What does that add to it? In what way does that add to the book? And why did you choose Patti Smith?
We nearly always choose an introducer, particularly for a new book. Sometimes with a series, we may do the first in the series with an introducer and not the rest of the books. But it brings somebody else's viewpoint to the book. I mean, Patti Smith has written a book herself about Blake. I think she received a copy of Blake's Songs of Innocence from her mother when she was 8 years old, and she says that she's continuously drawn influence from it. So it's a really cracking introduction. But yeah, it's something that we like to do, and it just sort of is a hook. You know, sometimes people will come in. I mean, for example, Raquel was talking about Shakespeare. You know, we just happen to have Judi Dench introducing that along with Greg Doran, and it's really wonderful to think, you know, when Judi Dench says, "Oh, this is wonderful," then that obviously helps us bring some publicity to the book, it's just a different angle. It makes it more open to a wider audience. I think brings people in.
Can we just talk a bit more before we sort of move on to sort of start to open up to questions about actually how the book was physically produced and where? There's a note in the front which is about you know, what's in there, the type of cloth used and things, but it says it's is it printed and bound in Italy? Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And do we and we've got the arena paper from the Blossom. Is that something that do you choose where it's being bound? Is it, how is the spine done? Is that hand sort of stitched and glued? I don't know how you do spines.
It would be part I can't say that word tonight. Anyway, you know what I mean. So the cases would be made mechanically, and then part of it would be mechanical and part of it would be by hand. The Italians are great bookbinders as well as great colour printers, and we place quite a lot of work in Italy. So this book would certainly not just be purely mechanically made. There would have been hand finishing, particularly things like the label on the front of the clamshell box and the lining, and all those things are done by hand. The book blocks would have been sewn mechanically, but then, you know, that hand finishing is really important with a book of this value.
Yeah. Thank you. So can I ask what else are you working on? What's next? It's that sort of classic, you know, end of chat. conversation about, are you all working on different projects, or, let's hear about something else from you that you've really got into that you're really passionate about. Do you want to start, Charlotte?
Can do. Well, it's just we've got both myself and Raquel we work very closely with each other. So everything's always in the pipeline of what the next project might be, who Raquel may approach for illustrators, and then that also has a bearing on how can that impact my page layout, what typography we might be using for the next project. It's also keeping in mind that we don't get too repetitive. So if we've gone for a certain look for one book, we want to try and avoid it for the next book. So it's always a nice challenge, but also keeps on our toes of it's always thinking of the next thing of what can we do next and how can we design it slightly differently.
Raquel, do you want to talk about a project that you've been working on or about to work on that you think is really bright and shiny?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to say exactly what project.
I checked.
Tell us about one you have worked on that it is recent that we should be aware of, just for the quality of the book.
Okay, so I've got so many projects. I work on 25 books simultaneously. I can't, my brain just now is not focusing on a specific one, but I'm currently working, like Charlotte said, and we work with Kate as well, choosing materials, and it all depends on the book, on what the book is. So we work on things from limited editions where we can just throw bells and whistles at the book, and it's really fantastic because you get to look at all these materials and cloths and foils and do crazy things like use Perspex or but we can also do very simple things and use, actually we have papers that take color in so beautifully, and they're papers that feel and look like cloth. So yes, it's just choosing, sci-fi books require different things, and sort of more literary things require other things. It's really hard to tell you exactly what projects, but yes,
I'm really curious to hear about the Perspex. How do you use Perspex on the book? I'm fascinated.
Well, it's not, I mean, we just used it for it was not my project, but it wasn't Perspex, it was acetate, wasn't it? For the circular, Kate, help me out here. Hitchhikers. Hitchhikers. There was a little window, and it was like a acetate window panel cut into the box, and that was in limited edition. And so you can see the books coming through. We do die cuts as well. I mean, it's fun.
The best thing is that we're doing things from exactly like that, and then we're using the most modern technology, which I think is the best bit about working on books for anything that we design and develop. You go from using Perspex and neons and all sorts of crazy things, and then I'm just currently working on on the Origin of Species, which we're publishing in at the end of January. So that's a really traditional edition, which will be quarter-bound in leather with hand marbled sides. So that's marbled by someone called Gemma Lewis, who lives in Wiltshire, and there's a very lovely video on our YouTube channel somewhere of her doing this marbling by hand. She puts it in the tray and then she pegs it out to dry like washing and sends it off to our binder, and they make the cases. So it couldn't be a more traditional book. So on my desk I'll have that, and then next to it I'll have something in neon or shiny paper
and actually the Shakespeare's, I think we should mention, because that was a project and a half where
wonderful project.
The bindings are weaved, and we looked back into the Tudor times where they would use black work embroidery. It came from Spain, from Catherine of Aragon, and she would actually hand embroider this, and it was used in cuffs and ruffles, and it ended up in pillowcases and things. So when this was weaved, we used linen, exactly how they would have used then, and the black thread, and that was a humongous project. And we went to see it being weaved at Walters and Sons, and
that whole industrial process from a piece of artwork from the artist, Neil
Yeah.
Packer, who Raquel commissioned, to see that then become, or just rolls of beautiful linen and silk. It was such joy, the whole thing. So we're very, very privileged to see this real craft element, which is really important to what we do at Folio. Trying to bring craft into as many books as we can. Firstly, because it's beautiful, but secondly, because we feel a real responsibility to keep craft binding going, and craft techniques, letterpress printing, hand marbling, weaving, all those things. We feel a real responsibility to keep those things going, and also, you know, our customers love it. I mean, we know we have obsessive customers who get very excited, and I get very excited about how we do things like the story, particularly with Shakespeare. We took them right through the process, kept releasing information about who we were working with and what the next step was, and so they were completely and utterly involved in the project like we were, which is very exciting.
That's great. So it's actually, you know, it's that bringing back or ensuring the continuation of the artisan work of the maker of the book, which is really where Blake,
which is thriving. Actually, it is really thriving. I mean, you sort of feel like, oh gosh, who's doing this stuff? But actually, these small bookbinders are really thriving, and that sort of particularly then there's a private press market, but there's been such a resurgence in bookbinding. You know, the binders we work with, you know, they're really busy. You know, you have to make sure that you book in, because they're booming, which is fantastic.
I can see we've started to get some questions coming into the chat, so I think I will open it out now to people's questions. This is a lovely question from Jane Montague. Jane, do you want to just come on? Do you want to come onto the screen and unmute yourself and say hi and ask your question, because it's a lovely one that anyone who's either worked in the book industry or loves books will have some sympathy with.
Yes, well, I think everybody who loves books has sort of experienced the power of smell when you open a book. You know, sometimes it can be unpleasant, but most times it's rather lovely. And I wondered whether this folio edition had a particular smell.
I'll open it and have a whiff and tell you, Jane. That's really it smells like it's sort of paper and printing ink, and there's something of sort of vanillin in there, isn't there? There's always there's something of vanillin, slightly vanilla-y. Yeah.
So a rather silly question, really. More importantly, I was wondering whether this edition allowed you to open the pages, and would it stay open? Because as an artist myself, I like to study the images, particularly Blake. You know, that every time you look at Blake's stuff, you see more and more, don't you? But it's very irritating when the pages shut, and so I didn't know whether there was a special.
There's a ribbon.
It's perfect.
And they do. I've just tried it now, Jane, and actually it does stay open. It stays open actually exactly as it does.
Oh, lovely.
Every folio book is sewn. They're never glued at the spine, and that's when books don't open properly. It's when they're glued. But we sew every book to ensure that it lies flat. You know, sewn right grain paper, so that reading experience is
I'll have to buy one. I've never had one, so that's the difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. David, Mia, you've asked a couple of questions, but I was particularly intrigued by you said you understand your reluctance to talk about future projects, but do you want to just come on screen and ask your question about you know, what else they've been working on? Hi, David.
Well, yeah, hi. I'm speaking from Vancouver Island, off the west coast of Canada.
Wow.
There's supposed to be somebody else joining me from Canada, but because we've just completed a course on Blake down at Vancouver Island University, which was very enlightening to me. I'm not very familiar with folios at all, and I was, you know, we all have to be paid for our labors of love, right? And I'm just wondering, are we going to discuss what these folios might cost? And I was also interested in what other folios you've done in the past, not in the future.
I'm
But
just
why don't we
looking
have
up
from
what it
each of
was in-
you? Can I suggest that we just, is there a particular book that you're just really fond of? That I'll give you a moment to think about that and won't put you on the spot. But I can tell you the cost of this was in the UK, it's £150. They do ship all over the world, as I understand it. You can
We
That's
have
good.
50% of our customer base was in the United States. The percentage, so it's 280 Canadian dollars.
Oh, okay.
But we
Yeah.
ship all over the world.
Well, in the course, the one that I particularly liked was the American Prophecy, but that's not Songs of Innocence or Experience. Is there any chance of doing folios on other Blake works?
We welcome suggestions. We're really engaged with our customer base. We quite often publish books that have been suggested by customers. So drop us a line, get in touch. We within the business, we all suggest books, ones that we're desperate to published. So we do a lot of customer research as well.
Thank you very much, David. Do you have, each of you, do you have a favorite book that just is like your personal favorite? I think we'd be curious to know.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think from
Is it
our
like choosing
latest,
a favorite child?
yeah, I mean, from the latest catalogue that we released, I think The Night Before Christmas has just been a really beautiful edition we've just done. And then looking at non-fiction, The Planets that we've just released it was just such a fun project to design, in a completely different way to this as well. That's kind of the beauty that a non-fiction you can take on a completely different approach. Thank you. Kate, do you have a favourite, or is that a mean question?
It's really hard, probably impossible. But at the moment, I'm still in love with the Shakespeare. That's for me been the best project of this year. So I'm still sort of slightly reeling from that. It's just been, yeah, a real pleasure. But I also love our Hilary Mantel series, which we've started publishing, the Wolf Hall series, and that I love the bindings on those. But every book is different. They all have such a joy.
Raquel, do you have a favourite, or are we going with Shakespeare?
Well, I go with Shakespeare, and I go with Night Before Christmas as well, because that was joy. But I also, the one that's really memorable to me is the PKD Ellie, because we had to work. We illustrated each the short stories, one illustrator per story, not all the stories, but the per set. So we worked with 26 illustrators at the same time, and it was quite crazy trying to sort of manage them all and look at all these illustrations. But it was so much fun, and we got to meet a lot of lovely illustrators. So yeah, I really enjoyed that, and working with the designers who did the box and the bindings, who did some really crazy stuff. But it was so much fun, all neon, and yeah, I think those are the most memorable for me at the moment.
Thank you. We've got a couple of hands up. Jennifer, Jess, you've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to come on screen and ask your question?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for fascinating discussion and for undertaking this project. I'm thinking more about the creativity required to produce this volume. Did that creative process reveal to you aspects of Blake's artistry that weren't evident to you before? And if so, what might those things have been?
Hey, you were the first one to see that.
Yeah.
Can we put back on screen? There's an image, another close-up image of the shepherd, I think, Ian, which shows that gold. Can we just have a look at that? I'm just wondering, what was the first thing that struck you then, Kate?
I think the detail and the softness I thought was magical. But what was really wonderful, and I hope we've achieved it in this edition, is that whenever I'd seen small editions, the writing and his text was really not easy to read at all. Whereas when we saw the originals, it was so clear, and that was really lovely, because the old printings of it just weren't good enough. So that was just the detail. I mean, on this one here, the gold on that is just extraordinary. So it just made you feel really close to him in a way, you know, the way that you could imagine him poring over these incredible illustrations. So that for me was the most striking thing. I think just seeing how beautifully he had painted that lettering.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Ian. Andy has got your hand up. Andy, do you want to pop on screen and ask your question? Hi.
Hi. Sure, I have loads and loads of folio books actually. So I've got the Gospels and Genesis, but also there's kind of all different kinds of folio books in my book. So I've got one of the P.K. Dick books, and that's one kind of folio book. But I've also got Hook's Micrographia, which is technically an absolutely brilliant achievement. And it occurred to me, and actually I have loads. I tried counting them before I got to 25. So I've got quite a lot of folio books. But in terms of the Blake books, there are some brilliant folio books on for his illustrations to Edward Young's, to Night Thoughts, to Thomas Gray. And to me, they're absolutely fantastic, definitive productions, you know, and I just want to recommend them to people, I suppose. But I would have thought in terms of taking on Blake, the big problem you've got is that he's done the design work. So you've got the material design and you've got the problem of translating it into a modern kind of product, which is fantastic because you have all the new printing technology, a lot of new digital technology, and it's really, really gone on absolutely leaps and bounds. So you can now do that. I mean, but it must be still an immense technical challenge to control that process. I have a copy of one of the Trianon Songs of Innocence and Experience, which is absolutely stunningly beautiful. Copy Z, and it's but they claim in the colophon that, you know, some of the pages for that took up to 30 plates to do. But so you can imagine that, you know, there's got well, what I'm trying to say is I love that kind of level of attention to detail in interpreting Blake, and you must have had to do the similar kind of process now. But I didn't. I'm hereby under false pretenses, really, because I didn't so much have a question as I really want to make a suggestion for a Blake project that I think would be a huge challenge for you. Because, as I say, your problem is fundamentally technical because you've got to take Blake's designs and take them to the book. So you don't have the scope to do like I have a beautiful one of your books actually, which is H.P. Lovecraft, which has some fantastic original artwork. And it seemed to me a great project for you to do would be to take on the Four Zoas of Blake Vala, because it's unillustrated by him, and you could get some fantastic, you know, modern illustrator to take that on in the way that the Lovecraft was done actually, which was both extremely, you know, adequate or not adequate. It's a brilliant interpretation of Lovecraft, but it was also very modern. It's a fantastic book. But you know, I think you could do the same sort of thing with the.
Andy, I've got little hands popping up everywhere. So
thank you.
I love the Lovecraft suggestion. In fact, there was a Lovecraft and Blake conversation going on Twitter yesterday which was really interesting. So yeah, and I'll look out for that Lovecraft. Jason Whitaker, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come on screen?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Again, another big collector of Folio Society books. And also, actually, it's following on slightly from the last one. And so my question is going to be a little bit cheeky in that I also collect the Trianon Press ones. And actually, to slightly put a different emphasis on Andy's comments, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me as a collector of Blake facsimiles across the range is that the big translation that took place at the end of the 20th century, the early 21st century, was the Blake Archive. So until that point, it was actually pretty much impossible to actually, sorry, my camera's doing a weird thing to show fish in the background. Yes, it was actually nigh on impossible to show Blake's various copies. It was just far too expensive. So Trianon Press was the most extensive attempt to recreate all of Blake's works as facsimiles. But they could only generally do one or at most two copies. And, you know, sort of like something Songs of Innocence and Experience, there's 50 odd copies, all of them differently illustrated, all of them with different colorings and designs. So actually, the simple question I have is actually, are you planning to do any more of Blake's works in facsimile? But also just to commend you on this, because the temptation now with Blake is that it is so difficult to reproduce Blake's works that actually we just rely, scholars rely on the Blake archive, they rely on the digital formats. But actually, whilst you are translating, as Andy said, you know, Blake had a very important concept behind the design of the book. But actually, whenever I'm teaching Blake, actually being able to take in facsimiles, particularly the try and press ones, but also then folio editions, to give a sense of the simple scale of these works, that these are actually, I mean, it's interesting that the version you're doing for the Songs of Innocence and Experience doesn't actually reproduce a tiny miniature, which Blake would have produced, but rather a folio work. But for example, I've taken in works, you know, sort of the Young's Night Thoughts, etc., which are huge. They were vast enterprises. And actually simply being able to physically handle something close to what Blake was producing can have an incredible stimulating effect. So thank you very much, as the camera does a weird thing again. Thank you very much for producing this particular one. And are there plans to do any more of Blake's works in the future?
Thank you, Jason.
I don't think we have any plans in the future. It's funny when you talk about Night Thoughts, because we did a facsimile of Night Thoughts, as you know, and I still reckon it's the heaviest folio book. With in those 2 volumes, it is the only. It was in a huge clamshell, and it's the only one I really can't get off the shelf. It's so enormous, but it's quite beautiful, and that was quarter-bound in leather, and also there's a different sort of that was done incredibly elaborately. But we did very few of them. Sometimes we do a limited edition of a book at a very high price, which is very exciting. This is sort of that I feel with this one. It feels like a limited edition. It feels really special because it's got all the treatment, but it's more affordable. But I don't think we have any more Blake on the agenda right now. I've got a publishing program here that takes us through to 2025, but you never know.
Well, there's a big anniversary in 2027, which is the 200th anniversary. So perhaps we should keep chatting.
Exactly.
And I love the idea of the 4 Zoas as well. I think I think 4 Zoas would make an amazing Marvel movie as well. I'd love to see Marvel Blake. I think that would be awesome.
You've already had the suggestion this evening. Somebody wants America a Prophecy. So America Prophecy would be huge for the American market.
Yeah. It would actually, yes, America Prophecy, absolutely. And talking of you know, on that continent, I've had a nice comment. Sergio Mondragon, I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced your name right. Has made a comment from Mexico. Sergio, do you want to come on screen and say hi on behalf of the Mexican collectors of folio, if you'd like to? I don't know where you are, or no. Okay, there's a nice comment in the thread about that there is a community of folio collectors in Mexico who treasure books by the Folio Society, and congratulations on the lovely work, and they will be getting it soon, they hope. Has anyone, I'm just scrolling down the questions. Jane's got another question about the printing techniques. Actually, I've wondered this as well, and you know, maybe Jason or Stephen or someone of the academics who's really looked at those books can also answer it. Is there any sense of kind of embossing on? Do you get any feeling of embossing or any visual embossing on thing from the original printing before it was coloured? Does that make sense?
Sorry, you asking?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
my
So,
question.
Jane, go ahead.
No, you said, as I wanted to say, I just wondered whether, given that these prints were embossed into paper, weren't they, for want of a better word, and then coloured afterwards, was there any way that you dealt with that in this edition?
Can you see it on those originals, Kate?
There wasn't a sense of it to me. There was certainly a sense of the gold being raised, but not of the image itself feeling embossed. It didn't feel like that. No, whether it had just been done very, very lightly. I
presume over the years, of course, it would all be flattened anyway.
Yeah. But I remember sort of turning the pages, and we were lucky enough to see the revert because they were loose leaves, effectively turning the pages, and I wasn't. I don't have a memory of it feeling embossed, and it's often quite obvious, isn't it? But not on the, no.
Thank you. No, that was interesting. That's an interesting question. Thank you, Jane. Has anyone got any further questions? We're on 8 o'clock, so if there are no further questions, I would like to please could you all say thank you very, very much to our fantastic panel. It was a real insight into how a folio book is made, and just the sheer level of detail that you're looking at to do that, to create that. I think, you know, even when you appreciate folio books and you love that sort of artisan quality, just the sheer level of detail that you guys are looking into is really, really mind-blowing. So thank you all very, very much. It's really nice to have you on screen, and thank you for coming to the Blake Society to talk to us.